Every pairing begins with two ways of feeling, two ways of seeing the world. An ESFJ warm, attentive, guiding strangers through the mountains. And an INFJ traveling alone into the sacred valley, carrying more than he says. They meet on a platform in Cusco, a New Year's sunrise ahead of them. And a connection neither planned to find. No romance, no promises. Just a moment that held them gently. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 2. The sunrise that didn't ask for more. Renzo had been up since before dawn, scarf wrapped around his neck, clipboard tucked under his arm as he checked names against the passenger list. Families gathered on the platform, huddling close against the morning cold. Couples posed for photos in front of the luxury train, breath turning silver in the air. New Year trips always felt like this. Hopeful, noisy, full of people traveling with someone beside them. Except for one. Renzo noticed him before he meant to. A man standing a little apart from the crowd, hands tucked deep into his jacket pockets. Canadian by the look of his paperwork. Quiet by the shape of his shoulders. He wasn't scrolling through his phone or taking photos. He was simply waiting. Renzo lifted the clipboard and called out, "Callum Clark?" The man looked up as though pulled from a thought. "Yeah," Callum replied, stepping forward with a polite, careful smile. Renzo checked him off and returned the smile. "Welcome. We board in a few minutes." Callum nodded. "Thanks." Just that. Nothing more, but Renzo felt a small tug. Something about the way Callum's eyes lingered on the train. As if he wasn't sure whether he deserved this journey. The platform filled with laughter and chatter. Renzo gave instructions, guided families, held doors open, answered questions about luggage. But every so often, his gaze drifted back to Callum, the only one without someone's arm linked with his. Renzo walked over, keeping his tone light. "First time in Peru?" Callum glanced at him, surprised by the attention. "Yeah." Renzo could hear the honesty beneath it, and the loneliness. "All right," Renzo said gently, "stick close when we board. I'll make sure you get settled." Callum's expression shifted, just enough warmth to show the words landed somewhere that mattered. When the boarding call echoed through the station, tourists gathered their bags, chattering with excitement. Callum remained where he was for a moment longer, letting the crowd move first. Renzo waited with him. It wasn't part of his job, it wasn't necessary. But something about Callum's quiet presence made Renzo slow down. Just enough to walk beside him as they boarded the train. The train slid out of the station with a smooth, steady hum. The kind that settled into your chest if you let it. Renzo walked the aisle, giving small explanations to guests, pointing out landmarks as the city fell away and the mountains rose in silhouettes against the early light. Most seats were full of pairs. Heads leaned together, shoulders brushing, laughter tucked between sips of morning tea. Only one seat had space beside it. Renzo caught himself glancing at it more often than he should. Callum sat by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of coca tea, watching the landscape shift from stone houses to winding rivers. The mountains revealed themselves slowly, peaks fading in and out of mist, almost dreamlike. Every now and then, Callum exhaled quietly, like someone letting go of thoughts he didn't want to carry. When the cabin settled into its rhythm, Renzo approached his seat. "You're okay?" he asked softly. Callum blinked, surprised again that Renzo remembered him. Then he nodded. "Yeah, just taking it in." He wasn't lying, but there was something else layered beneath it. A tiredness that didn't come from waking up early. Renzo stepped closer, lowering his voice so the moment stayed theirs. "Sometimes the mountains ask you to breathe differently," he said. "It's normal." Callum's eyes lifted to his, slow and searching. Renzo smiled, soft at the edges. "Mind if I sit for a minute?" Callum shook his head. "Please." Renzo slid into the seat beside him, scarf brushing against Callum's shoulder by accident. Callum didn't move away. Outside the window, the valley opened into a sweep of green and gold. Sunlight finally broke over one of the peaks, spilling across the river. Callum let out a breath. "It's beautiful," he murmured. Renzo watched him instead of the view. "It is." Silence settled between them. Not awkward, not distant, just easy. Like the train had carved out a pocket of quiet that belonged only to them. Renzo spoke first, voice low. "You're traveling alone?" Callum nodded once. "Yeah." "Well," he said gently, "if you need anything on this trip, I'm around." Thank you, Callum whispered. And this time, Renzo felt it. Really felt it. The train slowed into Machu Picchu Pueblo just as the sky began to brighten. Mist clung to the hills, softening every edge of the village. The air was warm, almost sweet, carrying the distant rush of the river. Renzo guided the group off the platform and through the narrow streets weaving between souvenir shops and small cafés. Callum walked a few steps behind them. Renzo looked back once, just to make sure he hadn't been left behind. Callum noticed. He gave a small nod that said, "I'm good." Renzo returned one that said, "I know." At the hotel lobby, Renzo shifted into his usual rhythm. Checking passports, handing out keys, explaining breakfast times and meeting locations. The couples asked questions, the families asked more. Callum waited until everyone was done. When he stepped forward, Renzo softened without meaning to. "Callum, right?" Renzo said, already holding the keycard with his room number. Callum took the keycard, brushing Renzo's fingers by accident. Neither pulled away quickly. Callum hesitated, glancing toward the rain-soaked window. "Do you know a place to get a beer tonight?" Renzo blinked, surprised by the question, and by the warmth he felt because of it. "There's a spot I like," he said. Callum nodded once, almost shyly. "Is it walking distance?" "Yeah," Renzo answered, then added before he could talk himself out of it, "I can show you if you want." Callum's eyes lifted to his, and for a moment the busy hotel faded into a soft, private pause. "I'd like that," Callum said quietly. Renzo swallowed, grounding himself again in his role. "All right. Meet back here around 8? 8, Callum repeated, as though agreeing to something more than directions. He turned toward the stairs, backpack slung loosely over one shoulder. Renzo watched him for just a second too long. Long enough to know this wasn't like guiding anyone else. Renzo met Callum at the hotel lobby right at 8. Callum was already waiting, jacket zipped, a polite half-smile ready. They stepped into the night together. The walk to the river wasn't long, but it moved through quiet, narrow streets. Small shops closing for the evening, lanterns glowing in windows, the scent of grilled meat and rain drifting in the air. Renzo kept a comfortable pace beside him. They turned down a small stone path that opened into a wooden terrace built right over the river. The Urubamba roared below them, loud, steady, almost like white noise shaped by mountains. The waiter recognized Renzo immediately. They sat at a corner table closest to the railing, where the spray reached their hands if the wind shifted. The first beers were easy. A shared clink, a quiet sip, the river filling every silence. Callum stared at the water for a long moment. "It feels like it could wash anything away." Renzo nodded, elbows resting on the table. "People come here for that." Callum's fingers tightened around the bottle, knuckles brushing moisture on the label. "If you feel like talking, I'm here." Callum let out a very small breath. "It's been a strange few months," Callum admitted softly. "Sometimes," Renzo said softly, "quiet things hurt the most." Callum looked up at him, then really looked. His eyes held that same softness from the train, only deeper now, warmed by the lantern glow and the river's constant hum. "You're easy to talk to," Callum murmured. Renzo swallowed, caught slightly off guard. "It's probably just the beer." Callum finished his beer, turning the bottle slowly between his hands. Then he looked up at Renzo with a tiny lift of courage in his voice. "Do you want one more round?" he asked, his tone gentle, almost shy. "And this one's on me." Renzo blinked, startled by how much that simple gesture warmed him. "You don't have to." "I know," Callum cut in softly. "But I want to." Renzo's smile was small, grateful. Callum signaled the waiter, who brought 2 more beers. And the second round was different. Callum talked a little more, Renzo laughed a little more. The river drowned out everything except the sound of 2 people being exactly where they needed to be. By the time they stood to head back, the mist had turned into a fine, cool rain. Callum slid his hands into his pockets. Renzo adjusted his scarf. And they started walking slow, unhurried back through the narrow streets lit gold by street lamps. On a small sloped bend of the road, their hands brushed. Callum didn't pull back. Neither did Renzo. They let the moment stay soft and unspoken, just like the river behind them. The climb began in near darkness. Guests murmured softly behind Renzo, boots tapping steadily against the worn stone steps. Lanterns lit the path in warm, narrow pools of light, each one flickering gently in the mist. Callum walked near the back, hood pulled up against the cold, breath a thin fog in the air. Renzo slowed his pace. Not obviously, not intentionally. Just enough to fall into step with him. "You slept okay?" Renzo asked, quietly enough that only Callum would hear. Callum nodded. "Yeah, I actually did." Renzo looked at Callum and smiled. They walked a few steps in silence, the mountains beginning to take shape around them, huge shadowed silhouettes waiting for the first touch of light. Callum looked up. The group moved ahead, conversations scattering like soft echoes. Renzo and Callum remained in their own pocket of quiet, matching each other's steps. A thin glow appeared on the horizon. Not quite light, but the promise of it. They reached a small terrace overlooking a wide eastern valley. Renzo guided the group into positions where they could watch, stretching out blankets pointing at the best view spots. Callum stood a little apart, hands in his pockets, shoulders lifted against the cold. Renzo approached him again. Callum glanced at the others, most clustered in pairs or families, leaning into each other for warmth. Then his eyes returned to Renzo. "Mind if I stand with you?" Callum asked, voice low. Renzo swallowed, something tightening gently in his chest. Not at all. They stood shoulder to shoulder, close enough for warmth, far enough not to draw attention. The sky shifted slowly. Deep indigo to purple, purple to rose, rose to the soft blush of morning. Callum exhaled, long and quiet. "I didn't think it would feel like this." "What does it feel like?" Renzo asked gently. Callum hesitated. Then, "Like being held without anyone touching me." Renzo's breath caught. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The first edge of the sun broke the horizon, a thin line of gold cutting through the mist. Callum's voice dropped to a whisper, barely audible over the wind. "There's something I've never said to anyone," he murmured. Renzo turned slightly, just enough for his attention to be complete, unobtrusive. Callum didn't look at him. He kept his eyes on the rising sun. "I wasn't just trying to clear my head," he whispered. "I was trying to feel like myself again." The words hung there. Renzo didn't reach for Callum, he didn't move too close. He just stayed beside him. The sun climbed higher, gold spilling across the terraces, catching in Callum's eyes and turning something inside him softer. Renzo spoke only when he felt Callum's breath settle. "You're allowed to start again," he said. "Even if you don't know how yet." Callum closed his eyes briefly, then opened them to the light. "Thank you," he whispered. The descent from the sunrise point felt different. Maybe it was the warmth finally reaching the terraces. Maybe it was the way the mist thinned, revealing more of the valley below. Or maybe it was the silence between them, lighter now, almost peaceful. Renzo walked ahead at first, checking on guests, guiding them down narrow paths carved into the slope. But every time he looked back, Callum was steady but slightly winded. Not struggling, just adjusting to the thin air. Renzo slowed until they walked side by side again. They continued downward, their steps falling into a quiet, natural rhythm. When the trail opened into a wider terrace, Renzo gestured toward the view. "Most people come for the sunrise," he said softly, "but this part, the walk down, I think it stays with you longer." Callum looked out at the valley, sunlight sweeping across the river far below. "I can see why." They continued walking side by side now, not intentionally, not by plan. Just naturally falling into rhythm. The group reached the base just as the morning crowds began arriving. Renzo gathered everyone together, voice calm and practiced. "We'll head back to the hotel for breakfast," he said. "Then later we'll take the final train ride back to the station where we started." People nodded, relieved to rest their legs. Callum waited until most people began walking. "You sit with guests?" he asked quietly. Renzo shrugged. "Sometimes, when they're good company." Callum's lips curved, soft as morning light. "Then maybe sit with me." Renzo nodded, pulse tightening a little in his chest. The hotel restaurant glowed with warm sunlight. Coffee steamed on tables. Fresh fruit and warm bread filled the room with a bright, inviting scent. Renzo and Callum took a small corner table near the window, away from most of the group. Callum slid into his seat slowly, as if the chair itself felt unfamiliar after the climb. I think that was the first sunrise I've actually watched all the way through. He lifted the cup. Renzo watched him, the way he relaxed into his chair, the way his shoulders dropped, the way his entire presence felt lighter than the night before. This place, Callum said softly, makes it hard to hold on to sadness. Renzo leaned forward just a bit. Sometimes that's what traveling is for. Letting the weight shift to somewhere that can handle it. Callum's eyes warmed. You sound like you've said that to a lot of people. Not really, Renzo replied. Just the ones who look like they've been carrying too much. Callum held his gaze for a second longer than necessary, and Renzo felt it. Thank you, Callum said quietly. For what? For this morning. For walking beside me. For not making me feel weird about feeling things. Renzo swallowed, then offered a soft smile. You don't have to thank me. You were good company. Callum looked down, hiding a smile in his coffee cup. The sun brightened through the window, warming the table between them. Light catching in the steam. Light catching in Callum's eyes. Light catching in the soft, unspoken moment neither wanted to end. The ride back felt different. Just the soft, restless hum of happy tourists, filling the cabin with questions and stories. Renzo barely had a moment to breathe. Every few steps, someone stopped him. He answered each one with the same calm warmth, but Callum could see it. The way Renzo's smile, though genuine, never quite reached the peaceful softness it held that morning. Callum sat by the window again. The river snaked through the valley outside, glinting beneath the sun. Every time Renzo passed, their eyes met. Callum found himself watching him, not in the obvious way. Not in a way anyone else would notice, just small glances. Small breaths, little moments of wanting. Eventually, Renzo paused beside him, resting a hand lightly on the back of Callum's seat. And he winked. A tiny private moment, quick enough for anyone else to miss, slow enough for Callum to feel it. Callum's smile rose before he could stop it. Renzo let out a quiet breath. Callum wanted to say, I wish we had more time alone. But he didn't. Renzo moved again when another guest waved him over. He gave Callum one last look, apologetic, warm, a little frustrated by the timing before he moved on. Callum watched him go, feeling something unexpected pull in his chest. He didn't want the day to end like this. He didn't want the morning closeness to disappear into crowd noise and train announcements. He wanted one more moment, a real one. Just them. And somewhere between the river bends and the shifting shadows of the mountains, Callum made a quiet decision. When they reached the station, he would ask Renzo for lunch, something grounded, something intentional. Because even if this connection only lived for a day, he wanted to choose it, and he hoped Renzo might choose it too. When the train slowed into the station, the spell of the mountains faded, not broken, just softened. Passengers stretched their legs, gathered their bags, exchanged stories about the morning. Renzo stood near the end of the platform, thanking each guest one by one, making sure everyone had what they needed before the group scattered into taxis and buses. Callum waited. Close enough that Renzo would see him when the crowd thinned. He tugged at the strap of his backpack, trying to steady the flutter in his chest. It wasn't nerves exactly. More like the quiet push of something he wasn't used to choosing. When the last family walked off toward the parking lot, Renzo finally looked up. Their eyes met. Renzo stepped toward him, smile easing back into its real shape. Not the polite guide smile, but the softer one Callum had started to recognize. Callum shifted his weight, took a breath, and stepped a little closer. Hey, he began softly. I know everyone's probably heading out, and you've had a long morning, but... Renzo tilted his head, encouraging. Callum swallowed once. Finding the courage he'd promised himself on the train, would you want to grab lunch with me? He let out a tiny breath, nothing fancy, just something before we go our separate ways. Renzo's expression shifted. Surprise first, then warmth, then something like regret passing gently through his eyes. I want to, Renzo said immediately, voice low and honest. Callum's heart tightened, not in disappointment, but in how genuine Renzo sounded. I have to get back to the office, Renzo continued. New Year's week is crazy, he exhaled softly. I wish I didn't. Callum nodded once. He didn't take a step back. He didn't swallow the moment. Instead, he breathed in the truth of it. Of course, he said. I get it. Renzo studied him for a second, then offered a small, earnest smile. But, if you don't mind, Renzo added, voice softening, I can walk you back to your hotel. At least that. Callum felt something warm gather in his chest. I'd like that, he said quietly. Renzo nodded, relief easing across his shoulders. He quickly finished guiding the last guests toward the waiting shuttles. Callum waited at the end of the platform, hands in his pockets, watching Renzo move with practiced, patient ease. When Renzo finally returned, his smile felt lighter, like something had clicked back into place, and together they started walking toward town. Not quite side by side at first, but close enough that their footsteps found each other's rhythm again, a walk instead of lunch, a moment instead of a meal, but somehow it felt just as important. The walk from the station settled into a quiet rhythm of its own, shoulders relaxed, steps unhurried. Callum said after a moment, I didn't expect today to feel this grounding. Renzo looked over. Grounding. Callum nodded slowly. Yeah, I've been floating for a while, just going through the motions. Today felt like I actually came back to myself a bit. Renzo didn't speak immediately. He let the words settle. Then softly, sometimes we need a place that asks us to slow down. Callum breathed out, a small exhale that carried relief instead of sadness. And sometimes, he added, voice quieter, we need a person who makes it feel okay. Renzo stopped walking for just a heartbeat. Not dramatically, just a small stillness, like the moment had brushed against something tender. He met Callum's eyes. I'm really glad I walked with you today, he said. They resumed walking, steps sinking without effort. They turned the final corner, the hotel rising ahead of them, sunlit and quiet. Neither man picked up the pace. If anything, they slowed. A soft moment hovered, a kind of pause that asked nothing. They stopped at the foot of the hotel steps, the warm afternoon settling over them like the soft end of a long breath. Callum turned toward him first. Thank you, he said, quiet but firm. For today, for everything. Renzo's smile was small, almost shy. Callum's eyes softened. All day long, people had been asking things of Renzo, questions, photos, directions. But when Renzo looked at him now, it felt like none of that had happened. Just them. Just this quiet. Callum hesitated. A tiny pause. Not uncertainty, just a moment to gather something gentle. Can I? He began, but Renzo already stepped forward. Callum didn't need to finish the question. Renzo wrapped his arms around him. Not rushed, not tight, just steady. A hug that held warmth without claiming anything. Callum melted into it slowly, his forehead brushing Renzo's shoulder. He inhaled the faint scent of sun-warmed fabric and mountain air on Renzo's clothes. For a moment, the world felt still. Then Renzo exhaled, like he'd been holding his breath for the last few minutes of their walk. They parted slowly. Both of them smiled in that quiet way. That comes from honesty, not performance. Renzo hesitated. Do you want to stay in touch? He asked quietly. Callum blinked, surprised, not because he didn't hope for it, but because Renzo was the one asking. Yeah, he said. They exchanged phones, the moment unhurried. Callum typed his number in, adding only his name. Renzo typed his too, then paused before handing the phone back. When their fingers brushed, it felt like the last ripple of the morning warmth. Renzo nodded toward the door. You should rest, he said. Callum smiled. You too. Renzo took a small step back, hands slipping into his pockets. Have a safe trip, he said softly. And a safe flight back home. Thank you. Callum went up the steps, pausing once at the top. Renzo was still there, looking up at him, with a soft, unreadable expression, sunlight catching in his eyes. They shared one last look, one last gentle breath of silence, before Callum pushed the door open and disappeared inside. Renzo turned only when the doors closed behind him, walking back down the street, his smile barely visible, but very real. Some connections don't ask for tomorrow. Some aren't meant to be held tightly or planned out, or carried further than a single day. An ESFJ and an INFJ, crossing paths in the sacred valley. One grounded in taking care of others, the other learning how to breathe again. They didn't fall in love. They didn't make promises, but for a few quiet hours, they became exactly what the other needed. Warmth meeting reflection, steadiness meeting softness. And when the day ended, it didn't feel like goodbye. Just a moment that landed gently and stayed where it needed to stay. This was men being too intimate. The sunrise that didn't ask for more. Ireland moves in quiet ways on early mornings. Gray light drifting over wet pavements. Buses humming through small towns, still half asleep. Rain threading across windows like someone thinking softly. It's the kind of place where strangers become familiar without ever saying a word. ESFP warmth enters the world like a spark. Bright, casual, unguarded, touching without thinking, laughing without meaning more than the moment. INFP feeling folds inward, soft, observant, hopeful in the gentle ways that make one small kindness feel like a promise, and somewhere between Drogheda and Dublin. On a bus that always starts empty, two lives brushed too close. One leaning without meaning it, the other catching the weight like a secret. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 2. The boy who slept against me. Rowan never meant to notice him, not really. It just happened the way small things do, quietly, gradually, without asking permission. Most mornings, the first stop crowd was the same handful of people. A pensioner with a canvas tote, a mother with school bags, two lads who always whispered about football. And him, the half-asleep boy in the hoodie. He boarded the 7:30 like the morning was too early for his soul to fully arrive, headphones around his neck. Hair pushed back in a way that looked unintentional but unfairly good. He always sat near the window, dropped into the seat with a soft thud, and closed his eyes before the bus even pulled away. Rowan didn't know his name, didn't know his job or his story or anything that would justify the familiarity building in his chest. He only knew they always caught the same first stop bus, and somehow that was enough to turn a stranger into a quiet part of Rowan's routine. Some mornings the bus was full enough that Rowan sat in a different row. Some mornings he found himself 2 seats behind, pretending not to look too long at the way the boy's hoodie bunched at his shoulder. Some mornings they were side by side, never touching, never speaking, never anything, but close enough for Rowan to feel a soft awareness settle beneath his ribs. He didn't know when the noticing began, only that he noticed now, and then came the morning it all tilted. The day the seat beside him was empty, and Rowan, without thinking, stepped into a moment that would follow him far longer than the bus ride itself. Shin didn't overthink mornings. He never had the energy. Most days he stumbled out of the house barely awake, hoodie half-zipped, coffee forgotten on the counter. The 7:30 bus was just something he survived on the way to Dublin. Sit down, close his eyes, hope he didn't snore. That was the whole routine, except there was this lad. Quiet, neat, always with that soft, thoughtful expression. A familiar face Sheen couldn't place the first few times, then slowly began to recognize in the fuzzy blur between sleep and wakefulness. They always got on together at the first stop. Sheen didn't know why that made him feel steadier. Just did. Some mornings the guy sat behind him. Some mornings across the aisle, sometimes right beside him when the bus got crowded. Always calm, always polite. A presence that made the morning feel a bit less brutal. Shane didn't know his name either. But he knew his vibe. Gentle, quiet, probably smarter than him, probably smelled nice too. Not that he'd ever admit noticing that. He wasn't thinking about anything deep this particular morning. Just tired, just cold, just wanting a seat. So when he climbed aboard and saw the bus nearly empty, he slid into his usual window spot with a sigh, pulled his hood up, let himself sink. He didn't even notice the quiet boy board behind him. Not until a small shift, a presence settling beside him, closer than usual. Sheen felt a tiny spark of surprise, not bad surprise, the warm kind. The kind that made the morning feel a little brighter for no reason he wanted to inspect. He opened his eyes for a second, saw him sit a little carefully, like he didn't want to disturb anything. Sheen meant to say hi, meant to smile, meant to at least pretend to be awake. But the bus hummed, the rain blurred the windows, the warmth of another person beside him eased something inside his chest, and Sheen's head drifted before he could stop it. He didn't even realize it landed on someone's shoulder. All he knew was, for the first time in weeks, sleep felt safe. Rowan didn't plan to sit beside him. He just moved with the morning. The bus was nearly empty, rain soft against the windows. Sheen was already there in his usual seat, hood up, forehead leaning against the glass. The seat beside him, usually taken, usually safe, was open. Rowan hesitated only long enough to feel his pulse once. Then he sat, not close, not hopeful, just beside him. Sheen didn't stir at first. He seemed deeper in sleep than usual, shoulders loose, breathing slow. Rowan tried to look out the window to pretend this was ordinary and unremarkable. But then, a subtle shift, a quiet inhale, the tiniest brush of fabric. Sheen's head tipped, just a little at first, then more, until the weight of him came to rest gently against Rowan's shoulder. A warmth that wasn't meant for him. A closeness that felt like a dream. A moment Rowan knew he'd think about far longer than he wanted to. He kept still, even his breath careful. Outside, the Irish fields blurred into soft, muted greens. Inside, everything was suddenly louder. Sheen's slow breathing. The quiet thud of Rowan's heartbeat. The strange comfort of being leaned on by someone who never meant anything by it. Rowan didn't move. He didn't dare. He let Sheen rest, even though it hurt in a way he couldn't name. And somewhere inside he knew he would remember this morning, long after Sheen forgot it. Rowan stepped off the bus with legs that didn't feel entirely like his own. The warmth of Sheen's head had lingered long after it lifted, a ghost sensation on his shoulder. A memory forming too fast. Too much for a morning that wasn't supposed to mean anything. He told himself to breathe, to walk to work, to forget. But instead, he watched. Sheen headed not toward the stops or the crosswalk, but toward the small cafe beside the station, the one with the fogged-up windows and the smell of roasted beans drifting into the cold. Rowan had never followed anyone like this, never wanted to, never dared. But something in him, something sparked awake by the weight of another person, moved before thought could stop it. He slipped inside the cafe after Shane. Quiet, cautious, hoping not to be noticed, Sheen stood at the counter rubbing sleep from his face, ordering in a voice still warm with morning. Rowan stayed a careful step behind, pretending to read the menu, while his eyes kept drifting to the profile he already knew too well. Sheen ordered something simple, something soft. A flat white with oat milk. Rowan didn't even hesitate. When it was his turn, he said, voice low, almost embarrassed, "Same as his, please." The barista nodded. 2 cups, 2 names to call. But Rowan didn't know his yet. He'd only had routine, familiarity, and a morning that shifted something in him. The cups appeared on the counter, steam curling upward. The barista called out, "Sheen!" and Rowan froze. Not because the name was unusual, but because hearing it felt too intimate, too close. Too much like something he wasn't meant to hold. Sheen collected his cup with a small, soft smile to the barista. He didn't see Rowan, didn't know he was there, didn't know anything had changed. But for Rowan, everything had. He whispered the name once under his breath as if testing it, and the moment settled in his chest, like something both precious and dangerous. Rowan spent the morning pretending to work. His screen glowed with half-finished layouts, but all he could think about was the warmth on his shoulder, the quiet weight of someone trusting him enough to lean. Every time he moved his arm, his body remembered it, that unintentional closeness. That borrowed moment. His coworkers joked about deadlines, about the rain, about lunch. Rowan nodded, smiled, tried to stay in the present. But the morning kept returning to him, like a tide pulling gently at his thoughts. He caught himself writing one name. In the corner of his notebook. Sheen. He erased it quickly. But the feeling stayed. Sheen's day was louder, faster. Filled with customers, coworkers, deliveries, the usual rush of Dublin streets. Sheen was restocking jackets in the back when his coworker Sean wandered in, chewing gum like he had nothing else to do. Sean leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "So did you catch today, or what?" Sheen blinked. "Who?" Sean rolled his eyes. "The one on your bus." Sheen groaned, dragging a hand down his face. "Man, I passed out on the bus, nearly headbutted the poor lad." "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, you're hopeless." Sean shoved Sheen's arm. "When are you gonna make a move, man?" You're acting like a 12-year-old with a crush. Sheen laughed, embarrassed, pink spreading across his ears. I'm not chicken, all right? I just don't want to be weird. Sean scoffed loud enough for the whole shop. You're weird anyway. Ask out, you muppet. Sheen tried to shove him back, but Sean dodged. I will, someday. Sean cackled. Aye, someday. Man'll be 80 before he says hello. Sheen muttered, feck off. But he was smiling, the shy, quiet kind he never let many people see. After that, he didn't think about the morning again. Not for long, but sometimes mid-conversation. His head drifted in a small, instinctive tilt, like he still expected someone to be there beside him. Someone steady, someone soft. He shook it off. He didn't think deeply about mornings, or about commuters he sat near. He lived in the movement, the warmth, the now, except every so often, when the memory flickered back, he felt safe. He didn't question why. Rowan Byrne always took the evening bus home. Same route, same timing, same quiet window view of Dublin slipping past. And though he'd seen Sheen O'Donnell before, in morning rush hours and fast glimpses in passing rows, they had never once returned on the same bus. Different schedules, different days, different timing. Until tonight. The rain had shifted everything: traffic, shoppers, work hours. And when Rowan stepped onto the bus, shaking water from his sleeves, he moved with the slow line of tired commuters, unaware, until he looked up. And there he was. Sheen in the window seat, head tilted toward the glass, half asleep already, hoodie pulled tight, hair damp from the drizzle and pushed back clumsily, like he jogged to catch the bus. Rowan stopped breathing for a second, not out of shock, but from the quiet, strange sense of, oh, you exist outside mornings. He didn't choose the seat beside Sheen. The line simply moved that way. The bus rolled into the wet Dublin streets, yellow lights smearing across the windows. Rowan kept his eyes forward, but he couldn't unnotice the small things. Sheen's slow, steady breathing, the way his fingers twitched when the bus jolted, the faint scent of rain and wool from his hoodie. Then, a bump in the road nudged Sheen's head into the window. He half woke, blinked, shifted back toward the cold glass. Rowan looked away. Then, the bus curved left. This time, Sheen drifted toward Rowan, head brushing Rowan's shoulder, before lifting again. As Sheen instinctively corrected himself, Rowan bit down on a breath, and then, the one that didn't correct? The bus hit the brakes at a crowded stop. Sheen's body leaned in with the motion, and this time he didn't move back. His head landed fully on Rowan's shoulder. Rowan didn't dare blink. He didn't lean in. He didn't take anything. He just let the moment rest against him. Sheen's hand slipped onto Rowan's thigh, his weight settling fully, trustingly, as if Rowan's shoulder had always been meant for him. Rowan didn't move at first. Didn't breathe. Didn't dare disturb the moment. But after a few beats, after feeling the heaviness of Sheen's sleep, Rowan realized something small. Sheen's neck was bent at a strange angle, a little too sharp, a little uncomfortable, so Rowan shifted, just barely. A gentle roll of his shoulder, a careful tilt of his posture, slow enough not to wake him, soft enough that no one else would notice. Sheen's weight followed naturally, falling into a better curve, more comfortable, more held. Rowan felt the difference immediately. Sheen's breathing eased. His hand relaxed on Rowan's thigh. His forehead brushed the side of Rowan's neck, as if settling into the perfect place to sleep. Rowan stared out the window again, heart aching, in that quiet, private way only one-sided longing ever teaches. He didn't take more. He didn't imagine more. He just made sure. Sheen slept well, for a moment that would mean nothing to Sheen, and far too much to him. Sheen O'Donnell woke up slowly, the way someone does when sleep has fully claimed them, and the world feels a little too bright. Rowan Byrne felt the moment before he saw it. The shift in weight, the faint inhale, the warmth lifting off his shoulder. Sheen straightened with a quiet grunt, blinking hard, scrubbing a hand down his face. A tiny sound escaped him, a soft, sleepy slurp, as he wiped the corner of his mouth, half embarrassed, half still dreaming. Rowan kept his gaze fixed on the front of the bus, fighting the need to look at him, to memorize the exact shape of this moment. Sheen blinked again, finally noticing the space between them. His eyes flicked to Rowan's shoulder, to the faint impression of where his head had rested, and then he froze. Sheen's gaze dropped to his own hand, still lying, very comfortably, on Rowan's thigh. A beat, just long enough for something like, "Ah, shite," to flash across his face. His hand shot back so fast he smacked his knuckles on the seat divider. "Jesus. Sorry, man." A panicked little whisper shout. He shook out his hand, mortified, cheeks turning a soft pink beneath the bus lights. Rowan folded his hands together. Calm on the outside. Nowhere near calm on the inside. The bus hummed forward, carrying both of them in silence again, but not the same kind as before. The rest of the bus ride passed in a strange, quiet tension. Sheen O'Donnell tried to pretend nothing had happened. Rowan Byrne tried to pretend he wasn't replaying everything in his mind. Their elbows stayed carefully apart. Their knees never touched again. Sheen kept wiping the corner of his mouth in tiny, embarrassed little gestures. When the bus slowed for their stop, both men stood. The aisle was tight. They ended up close. Too close. Rowan slightly ahead, Sheen behind him. Rowan shifted forward to give space. That's when it happened. Sheen saw it. A small, unmistakable damp patch on Rowan's sweater. Right at the shoulder, where Sheen's head had been. Sheen's eyes went huge. He lifted a hand and tapped Rowan's arm. A soft, urgent, please look kind of tap. "Mate," Sheen whispered, horrified, tilting his head toward Rowan's shoulder. Rowan glanced down, startled. Sheen slapped a hand over his own face. "Ah, for feck's sake, I drooled on you?" Rowan shook his head, gentle. "It's fine." "It's not fine," Sheen hissed, mortified. Sheen dropped his hands helplessly. "I owe you something for that, at least a drink, a full pint." He pointed at Rowan's shoulder like it was a crime scene. Rowan blinked. "A drink?" "Aye," Sheen said, cheeks pink. That bright, easy smile returning, but softer now. "Come on, I'm buying." The bus doors opened. Cool night air spilling in. Rowan stepped off first, heart lifting in a way he wasn't ready to admit. Sheen followed beside him, nudging his elbow lightly. "All right, man," he said with that warm Irish charm. Rowan nodded, trying not to fall for what wasn't meant. Deadly pub's this way, and Rowan, still warm from the softness he shouldn't have felt, walked with him into a night. The pub was warm the way Irish pubs always are. Glowing lamps, worn wood, soft chatter. A little pocket of safety from the cold. Sheen O'Donnell ordered 2 pints like they were old friends. "Still can't believe I drooled on ya." He shook his head, laughing into his elbow. Rowan Byrne smiled without meaning to. "It wasn't that bad." "It was," Sheen insisted. "But thanks for letting me buy ya a peace-offering pint." They clinked glasses. For a little while it was easy. Sheen talked about work. Customers from hell, deliveries gone wrong. A lad who tried to return a jacket after wearing it on a stag weekend. Rowan laughed more than he expected to. There was something bright about Sheen. Something alive. Something that made the room feel lighter. Sheen leaned back in his chair, stretching. "You're sound, man. You know that? Don't usually talk this much to strangers." Rowan's heart tugged. "I'm glad you did," Sheen smiled. The kind of smile that made Rowan believe in impossible things, but then Sheen's eyes flicked toward the bar, just for a moment, barely more than a glance. Rowan followed it without thinking. A girl stood there, dark hair, bright laugh, talking to the bartender as she waited for her order. Sheen looked away quickly. "Workmate?" Rowan asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Sheen shook his head, cheeks warming. "No, just..." He gestured vaguely. "She gets the same bus sometimes." Rowan swallowed. "The bus?" Sheen laughed once, awkward. "Been sitting behind her for weeks, trying to say something, but I'm a feckin' coward." Rowan felt something inside him tilt. Not sharply. Not dramatically. Just enough to hurt. Sheen didn't notice. He was watching the girl. Watching her laugh, watching her shoulder brush someone else's arm. Rowan looked at his pint, at the foam settling, at the reflection of a moment that had never truly belonged to him. Sheen cleared his throat, forcing his gaze away. "Anyway," he lifted his glass. Rowan lifted his pint with a small, practiced smile. and Rowan swallowed the ache with the beer, letting the warmth blur the edges of disappointment. The second pint loosened Sheen's shoulders and softened Rowan's edges, just enough to pretend everything was fine. But the truth hovered. In the glances. In the pauses. In the way Sheen couldn't quite stop looking toward the bar. Rowan noticed. Of course he did. And Sheen finally cracked. He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. All right, real talk. Rowan set his glass down gently. Sheen nodded stiffly, then flicked his eyes toward the bar again. You're, better with words than me. He gestured vaguely. Quiet lads always are. So how do I, talk to her? Rowan blinked. Oh. Sheen didn't hear the weight in it. He was chewing the inside of his cheek, anxious and excited. I'm hopeless with women, swear to God. He dropped his head into his hand. Been sitting behind her on the bus for weeks, thinking, this is the day, Sheen, you'll say something. And then I fall asleep like a feckin' toddler. Rowan stared at the table for a moment, collecting himself, smoothing out the pieces so he didn't bleed all over the floor. You want advice? Rowan asked softly. Sheen lifted his head, hopeful. Yeah, please. Rowan took a breath, then forced a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, he sipped his pint, thinking. Drool on her. Sheen froze. Drool on her? Rowan nodded, face completely serious. Worked on me. Sheen choked on his beer. Jesus Christ, Rowan. Rowan finally cracked a smile. A pint after and maybe she'll forgive you. Sheen shook his head, laughing hard, hand on his chest. A pint and drool, that's your grand romantic strategy? Rowan shrugged. Could get you a date. Could get you slapped. 50-50. Sheen slapped the table. Might as well flip a coin, you bastard. Rowan laughed, quiet and warm and aching. Sheen grinned at him, eyes bright. All right, tell you what. If I actually try it, I'll update ya. Rowan swallowed. Please do. Sheen looked toward the girl again, thumb rubbing his lower lip in that same nervous way. Not tonight, though. He exhaled sharply. Feck me. I'm not drunk enough for heartbreak. Rowan's heart stuttered in his chest. Neither am I, he thought, but smiled instead. We should head out, Rowan said. Yeah, Sheen agreed, grabbing his jacket. Thanks, man. Felt good talking to you. Rowan nodded. The night air hit Rowan softly. Dublin in the rain always felt like a pause. Between one feeling and the next, Sheen walked beside him for a block, hands in his hoodie pockets, bouncing lightly on his heels, as if he still had leftover energy from laughing in the pub. Rowan matched his pace. Because it was easier than not. At the corner, Sheen slowed. This is me, he said, nodding down a side street. Well, thanks again. Rowan managed a small smile. Can't believe that's your big plan. Use it wisely. Oh, I won't, Sheen laughed. No woman deserves that. See you around, yeah? Sheen said. Yeah, Rowan replied quietly. See you. Sheen gave a casual salute and jogged off. Rowan watched him turn the corner and disappear, then he exhaled. He didn't replay the whole night. He didn't dramatize it. He didn't let himself crumble. He just felt it. The way Sheen leaned on him without knowing. The way that closeness had lit something soft inside him. The way Sheen's crush had blown it out like a candle. Rowan tucked his hands deeper in his pockets. His shoulders curled subtly inward. That's the thing about falling for a straight person. The heartbreak isn't sharp. It isn't loud. It's soft. A whisper more than a wound. A small bruise under the ribs that only hurts when pressed. Rowan didn't press it, he just walked home through the rain, letting the night settle around him, like a blanket he didn't ask for. Some stories don't unfold the way we imagine. Some moments begin with warmth on a shoulder, a shared bus ride, a quiet laugh in a pub, and end with nothing more than a soft ache. And the sound of rain on the walk home, Rowan didn't fall in love? Not really. He fell into a feeling, the kind that rises quickly and dissolves just as quietly. Sheen didn't break his heart. He simply didn't see it. And maybe that was always the point. Because not every connection becomes romance. Not every closeness turns into a confession. And sometimes the best thing two people can be is a small, unexpected part of each other's ordinary day. Maybe Rowan and Sheen will meet again. Maybe they'll share another pint, another laugh, another sleepy bus ride. Not as almost some things, but as something steadier, something gentle, something without ache. A friendship, unexpected, unasked for, but maybe exactly right. The ESFP and the INFP, one living in the moment, one feeling beyond it. This was men being too intimate. The boy who slept against me. Paris on Valentine's night glows warm against the February cold. Steamy windows, red ribbons on doors, every small restaurant overflowing with couples, except one table. ENFJ warmth moves through the city with quiet intention. ISFJ steadiness with soft, familiar calm. Two men who didn't plan to find anyone tonight. One booked a table for one without realizing the date. The other walked in like he always does, a regular who forgot what day it was. This is where their night begins. This is Men Being Too Intimate, Season 2. A table for one. February rain came down in a thin, misty curtain over Paris. The kind that blurred lights into soft halos and made strangers walk a little closer to one another. Adrien stepped off the curb in front of Bistrot Lob, a tucked-away neighborhood restaurant he'd bookmarked weeks ago. He'd wanted warmth tonight. A quiet meal, a soft atmosphere. Something comforting after a long week at the museum. He pulled out his phone. His reservation blinked up at him. Table for 7:30 p.m. The words felt suddenly loud. He hadn't realized when he booked, he just clicked the first open slot. But now, standing in front of a restaurant with heart-shaped window decals and couples lined up under shared umbrellas, he exhaled, almost amused. Valentine's Day, the one day he never paid attention to, because it always belonged to other people. He pushed the door open. Warmth washed over him instantly. Candle glow, the smell of butter and garlic. Steam against fogged windows. Glasses clinking softly. His coat dampened on his shoulders as he stepped in. The headwaiter looked up, someone calm, sharp-eyed. Someone who managed Valentine's chaos with a practiced grace. He scanned his list, then met Adrien's gaze with a small, knowing smile. Adrien felt his chest tighten with a shy heat. The waiter led him through crowded rows of tables. Every seat full, every pair leaning close over dessert plates. Adrien wove between murmured conversations, soft laughter. Hands gently meeting in the middle of tables. Then, a corner. Small, warm. One plate, one napkin. One candle burning steadily like it was trying its very best. Adrien sat down, coat draped over the chair back. He let out a slow breath. The candle flickered. Paris murmured outside the window. He could almost pretend the night wasn't meant for lovers. That a table for one wasn't a spotlight on his quiet loneliness. He smoothed the edge of the menu. A table for one, just enough. At least that's what he thought. Julien pushed open the door with a hand braced against the small wooden frame, cold rain clinging to his coat. He stepped inside expecting the usual sight. Quiet tables, slow conversations, the comfort of routine. Instead, the room was glowing. Every table carried a small candle he didn't recognize. The kind wrapped in a tiny red sleeve. The windows were fogged from too many warm bodies. Soft laughter and close whispers drifted through the room. He stopped just inside the doorway. He absolutely knew what tonight was. He'd passed florists overflowing with roses. He'd seen couples bundled together on the metro. But he hadn't expected this little neighborhood restaurant, his quiet, tucked-away refuge, to be swept up in the Valentine's rush. He took in the sight slowly, registering each detail he'd never seen here before. The waiter dressed just slightly nicer than usual. Julien let out the softest breath through his nose. For a second, he considered turning around. Not because he felt out of place, he was used to being alone, but because it felt wrong to take up space in a room made for tenderness. But before he could step back into the rain, the headwaiter noticed him. His face brightened instantly. "Julien! Bonsoir." Julien relaxed a little. He wasn't special here, but he was familiar. "I didn't realize you'd be this full tonight." The waiter's laugh was warm. "Valentine's, my friend. Lovers need food, too." Julien nodded, eyes sweeping the packed room again. He spotted couples everywhere, hands brushing, shoulders touching. Normally, he didn't mind it. Normally, he even found it beautiful. Tonight, he just felt surprised. "I don't think you have space for one more." he murmured. "I'll come back tomorrow." But the waiter shook his head immediately. "I'll find a way." Julian blinked, caught somewhere between touched and embarrassed. The waiter lowered his voice. "We do have one seat. For one." Julian followed his subtle glance. Toward the back corner, where a man sat alone, elegant posture, soft eyes studying the menu. Someone who didn't quite fit loneliness. Even if tonight placed him there. "If he doesn't mind sharing," the waiter said. Julian hesitated for a polite beat, the kind of courtesy that lived deep in him, but the truth was, he didn't want to step back out into the cold. And something about that man in the corner, the quiet warmth in his expression, felt safe. Julian swallowed. "Okay," he whispered, "if he's willing." The waiter smiled, half fond, half triumphant, and moved toward the corner table. Julian watched as he approached the man. Watched the man look up, startled. Watched the waiter gesture gently in Julian's direction, and for a moment, Julian felt the strangest mix of nerves and curiosity. A table for one, he thought. Maybe not tonight. Adrien had just decided what to order. When the soft shuffle of footsteps stopped beside his table, he looked up. The head waiter was there, hands folded politely, expression gentle but carrying something tentative. Adrien straightened a little. "Monsieur Morel, may I ask you something?" Adrien blinked. A question at a restaurant on Valentine's Day. This already felt unusual. The waiter stepped slightly aside, angling his body so Adrien could see past him. Toward the entrance, a man stood there, a quiet presence. His eyes were warm even from a distance. Adrien felt something shift in his chest. The waiter lowered his voice. "Would you mind sharing your table?" Adrien glanced at the empty seat across from him. The candle between them flickered, almost expectant. A table for one. A quiet night, and suddenly an unexpected possibility. His first instinct was kindness. His second was curiosity. Adrien looked again at the man by the door. Julian, though he didn't know his name yet, wasn't pushing forward, wasn't assuming anything. Just waiting for permission he wasn't sure he deserved. Adrien felt something soften. "I don't mind," he said. "If he's comfortable, I'd be happy to share." The waiter's smile deepened with relief and a hint of mischief. "Merci, monsieur." He returned to the entrance. Adrien watched, not openly, but enough to catch the moment Julian's shoulders loosened, when he heard the answer. Then the waiter gestured him in. Julian approached slowly through the narrow aisle, careful not to disturb couples leaning into each other. He kept his gaze low until the last moment. Then he looked up, and Adrien met those gentle, steady eyes for the first time. A quiet recognition pulsed between them. Julian offered a small, shy smile. Adrien returned it with something soft and inviting. So much for a table for one, Adrien thought. Maybe this seat had never been meant to stay empty. Julian settled into the seat slowly. Placing his gloves on his lap, menu lifted like a shield. Adrien lifted his own, offering a small, polite smile, before letting both of them slip into a quiet moment of reading. Except, only one of them was actually reading. Julian already knew this menu by heart. He knew the soups, the stews, even which dessert sold out first on rainy nights. He kept his eyes down anyway, trying not to look directly at the man sitting across from him, this elegant stranger with soft eyes, and the kind of presence that felt warm. Adrien, meanwhile, studied the menu with careful attention. He browsed slowly, thoughtfully, genuinely. Julian lowered his menu a little, then set it down. His fingers instinctively reached for the small candle between them, gently brushing the warm glass, as if grounding himself in the soft glow. He turned it slightly, watching the flame bend and straighten. He didn't mean to look nervous, but he was. He kept his gaze anywhere but forward. But eventually, inevitably, he looked up. Adrien's eyes were already on him. Julian froze for half a second. The candle flickered between them, catching the moment in warm gold. Adrien offered the softest smile, the kind that didn't push, but welcomed. Julian's breath hitched almost imperceptibly. He nodded back, polite but slightly flustered, as if acknowledging something real without naming it. Around them, the restaurant moved with Valentine's noise, but the little table felt suspended in its own quiet. Adrien lifted his menu again, but his eyes lingered a moment longer on the man across from him. Julian lowered his, fingers brushing the candle holder once more as if steadying himself. Neither said anything. Not yet. Julian inhaled softly. Have you decided? Adrian's smile tugged gently at the corner. Not yet, he admitted. Everything looks good. And you seem to know this place better than I do. Julian gave a tiny, nervous laugh. He folded his hands, thumb brushing his knuckles. I live nearby. I come here often. It's small, but the food is honest. Adrien liked that answer, liked the way Julian said honest. Then I'll take your recommendation seriously, Adrien said, leaning in. What should I try? Julian hesitated, then pointed subtly at the menu. Adrien listened with a kind of attention that felt rare. He tilted his head, considering the options with a small smile. Then he looked up, eyes warmer than before. And what about you? Julian blinked, caught off guard by the question. He tucked a strand of hair behind his ear and answered honestly, I'm thinking main only. Adrien nodded thoughtfully, and Julian felt the faintest heat spread up his neck, not from embarrassment, but from being listened to so carefully. The candle flickered, silence stretched, and then the waiter appeared. He moved like someone who had seen too many Valentine's days to take any of them too seriously. He clasped his hands behind his back, glancing between Adrien and Julian with a knowing spark. Have we decided? Adrien opened his mouth, but the waiter lifted a hand lightly. But before you choose, let me explain tonight's special menu. Julian closed his eyes for one brief, doomed second. The waiter cleared his throat theatrically, drawing in a few amused looks from surrounding tables. Tonight, our menu St. Valentin is designed for two. Roasted figs with honey, 2 mains of your choice, and a dessert meant to be appreciated together. But I can bring 2 plates. Adrien lifted a brow, intrigued. Julian went perfectly still. The waiter leaned closer, lowering his voice. It is cheaper, and frankly, much better shared. Julian immediately shook his head. The full set would be too much. The waiter turned to Adrien. And you, monsieur? Would you like the full Valentine's experience or something lighter? Adrien didn't answer right away. He looked across the table instead. Julian met his eyes. A brief pause. Then the smallest nod. Adrien turned back to the waiter. The choice already made between them. The waiter beamed. He winked and took the main order for 2 and vanished into the kitchen. Julian let out a breath he'd been holding. He's always like this, he murmured, voice barely above a whisper. Adrien folded his menu, resting his elbows lightly on the table. The dinner had just begun, but already the night felt different. The appetizers arrived with a soft clatter, steam curling upward in thin, fragrant ribbons. 2 plates not matching perfectly, but clearly dressed for Valentine's Day. A tiny beetroot heart on Adrien's, a sliver of carrot cut into a heart on Julien's. Bright, savory color against warm roasted figs. Julian blinked at the garnish, just once. Adrien's mouth tugged into a quiet, hidden smile. The restaurant buzzed softly around them. The rustle of napkins, the slide of plates across tables, murmured conversations tucked into pockets of candlelight. But here, at this little corner table, the world slowed itself down. Julian lifted his fork, cutting into the fig with steady hands. The kind of quiet movement that said, he was still adjusting to the idea of not dining alone. Adrien followed suit, his posture warm, open, the candlelight catching the edges of his expression. The food was good, savory, warm, the kind that softened the cold from outside. Julian's shoulders gradually lowered with each bite, comfort finding him piece by piece, like warmth returning to chilled fingers. He glanced up once, briefly, long enough to catch Adrien tasting the fig, with the thoughtful seriousness of someone who valued food. Their eyes met for a half-second. Adrien gave a tiny nod. Julian brushed his thumb along the edge of his plate, a small habit, and Adrien watched with quiet interest. Julian felt it without looking up. The appetizers disappeared gently, bite by bite, as the night pulled them into a soft, unspoken rhythm that neither had expected. The mains arrived with quiet grace. Adrien cut into his first bite. Crisp skin, tender meat, the kind of warmth that spreads instantly. He paused, chewed once, then looked up, surprised by how good it was. Julian's eyes lifted, cautious at first. This is incredible. Thank you for recommending it. Julian's shoulders eased, just a little. You're welcome. Adrien tasted another bite, slower this time. Julian lowered his gaze. But he didn't hide the faint curve of his mouth. A comfortable pause settled. Adrien reached for the wine list left beside the candle. He hesitated just a moment, then asked lightly, "Would you like to share a bottle? It feels like a good night for one." Julian blinked, surprised by the gentle invitation. "Red?" Adrien agreed. The waiter returned, set a Bordeaux between them, poured 2 glasses, and left them in their small pool of warm light. They clinked softly. The wine loosened something in the air. Adrien leaned back a little, more relaxed now, more open. Julian took a sip, fingers brushing the stem of the glass, shoulders unwinding with each taste. "So," Adrien said, a lazy warmth entering his tone. "What else do they do well here, besides chicken?" Julian thought for a second, eyes flicking to the kitchen door. Adrien listened with interest, elbow lightly against the table. Julian looked up. A small, shy glance that held longer than before. The candle between them flickered, catching the rim of their glasses, coloring the moment with something warm and unspoken and just beginning. The wine softened the edges, the food warmed the center, and the two of them, quietly, slowly, started to lean into the night together. The mains were cleared away, with the slow, gentle rhythm of a restaurant that never rushed its regulars. Julian sat back slightly, still savoring the last warmth of thyme and roasted chicken. That was when the chef emerged. Older, warm-eyed, apron dusted with flour. The kind of owner who treated his bistro like an extension of home. He made quiet rounds from table to table, nodding, checking in, offering short greetings to couples leaning close. When he reached Julian and Adrien's table, he slowed. Julian straightened subtly, the way someone does when they recognize an old neighbor. The chef's eyes warmed, as if seeing a familiar face with company was all the answer he needed. He gave a small, approving nod to Julian, a silent thanks for coming. Before moving on to the next table, Adrien watched the exchange with a quiet smile. He didn't comment on it. Moments later, the waiter arrived with their dessert, Valentine's Day special. 2 plates set down with the tiniest flourish. Not overly sweet, not flashy, just a soft chocolate cake, with a swirl of raspberry coulis, curved like a petal. But then, another item. A small, heart-shaped box, bright red, glossy, placed gently between their plates. From the chef. The waiter announced with a cheerful tilt of his voice. Julian turned automatically toward the kitchen. The chef was watching out of the corner of his eye, and when Julian met his gaze, the chef raised a discreet thumbs up. Julian's ears turned pink immediately. Adrien tried, truly tried, not to smile too broadly. But the combination of Julian's blush and the chef's earnest approval made it impossible. Julian opened the little box. With careful fingers, inside 4 small chocolates, each one different. Adrien leaned closer, voice warm with genuine delight. "That's very sweet of him." Julian swallowed, embarrassed but amused. "He probably thinks I brought someone for Valentine's." Adrien glanced at him. Soft, sincere. "Well, you did." Julian's breath caught, not dramatically. Just a quiet moment of realizing how much warmer the room felt. He looked back into the chocolate box, trying to hide the tiny smile that curved his lips. The candle flickered. The chef turned back to his kitchen, and between them the chocolates gleamed softly. A small, unexpected gift. The last of the Bordeaux clung to the bottom of the bottle, dark and warm under the low candle. Adrien lifted it gently, tipping the final splash equally between their glasses. A soft, unspoken one more moment together. Julian watched the wine settle, its deep red catching the candle flame, like a small ember floating in glass. Neither hurried to drink. The restaurant had softened into its late-night quiet, the post-dinner hum settling into a gentle murmur, chairs scraping softly from tables across the room. Couples drifting toward the coat rack, hand in hand. Adrien leaned back in his chair, hands loose around the stem of his glass, posture relaxed in a way that only comes after good food, good conversation, and a kind of unexpected comfort. Julien sipped his last mouthful of wine slowly, letting the warmth spread from tongue to chest. He set the glass down with a quiet breath, content, almost serene. Adrien mirrored him. Their glasses now empty, the candle between them burning low. The waiter approached with soft footsteps, placing 2 receipts on the table. They each took a receipt. They both began gathering their things, scarves, coats, phones. Little motions done in comfortable silence. It looked like the natural end of a night. The part where you stand, smile politely, say goodnight, walk separate ways. Outside the door, the February air rolled in cool and crisp. The night had settled into a quiet glow, pavements still damp, street lamps scattering light like golden petals across the ground. Julien tugged his scarf closer. Adrien zipped his jacket a little higher. They stepped away from the restaurant entrance, where warmth bled onto the sidewalk toward the chilly air, and the faint sound of distant traffic. For a few seconds they stood together, under the street lamp. 2 coats, 2 breaths blooming white, 2 hearts not ready to separate. Adrien looked over. The kind of look that tests a boundary, without crossing it. Would you... A pause, gentle. Like to walk a bit, if you're not in a hurry? Julien blinked in that small, startled way he had. The kind he tried to hide but never succeeded. He wasn't in a hurry, not even close. Yeah, he said quietly. His voice warmed despite the cold. I'd like that. Adrien exhaled, relief mixed with something quietly hopeful. And together, side by side, they stepped into the Paris night. Their breaths puffed white into the cold air, each exhale briefly visible before fading. A quiet harmony. Adrien walked with his hands in his pockets, shoulders loose, coat swaying lightly with each step. Julien walked with the quiet composure he carried everywhere. But tonight there was something gentler in his posture, something open. Every so often their arms brushed, not deliberately, not avoided either. A block later, the street widened into a charming little corner, a florist's stand still open despite the hour. Adrien slowed. Julien followed his gaze before he realized what was happening. Adrien approached the stand, exchanging a warm smile with the vendor and selecting a small bundle of roses. 5 wrapped simply in brown paper. Adrien turned back to Julien, smiling softly with the roses. Julien thanked and held the roses, the petals catching the soft glow of passing lights. After a minute, Adrien tilted his head. Which way is home for you? Julien hesitated. Just a small beat, then let out a shy breath. We actually passed it. Julien's ears warmed pink as he looked down at the roses in his hand. I didn't want to stop walking yet. Adrien stared for a second, then smiled. Something blooming in his chest. Julien's eyes softened. Adrien shifted, turning to him. His breath pooled warm in the cold air. I had a really good time, he said. Would you like to see each other again? Julien didn't blink. They exchanged phones. Their fingers brushed briefly. Numbers saved. Names typed, a tiny vibration confirming it. Adrien stepped back half a pace, giving space. I should let you go home, he said with a soft smile. But next weekend, let's plan something. Julien nodded, a shy, warm glow rising in his expression. I'd like that. He tucked the roses closer to his chest, turned toward his real street this time, walked with a little more lightness. Halfway to his door, his phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He stopped under a street lamp to check it. Adrien, thank you again. It was genuinely lovely meeting you today. He typed back, thumb steady. The night wrapped around him, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled his way up the steps of his home. Some evenings don't happen the way we expect. Some moments begin with a crowded restaurant, a table meant for one, a polite nod to a stranger, and end with a shared walk through quiet streets. Adrien didn't fall in love. Not yet. He simply found warmth in someone's steadiness. By someone who made the night feel less like Valentine's Day and more like possibility. And maybe that was always enough, because not every connection is a confession. Not every closeness turns into a promise. Sometimes the best part of two people's night is the quiet decision to keep walking a little longer. The ENFJ and the ISFJ, one offering intention, one offering steadiness, a pairing that doesn't rush, doesn't ask for more than the moment, and still leaves something soft behind. This was men being too intimate, a table for one. Egypt doesn't quiet down at night. The desert cools, the Nile glimmers, and the Grand Egyptian Museum glows like a vault of memories. All stone, all silence, all the truths people try not to face. Some walk toward history to learn it, others to hide inside it. But every mask reflects something back. ENTJ certainty moves with quiet authority. ISTJ order walks beside him, holding more inside than anyone knows. Two men who didn't expect honesty tonight, one already living in the open, the other breaking beneath the weight of who he's never said he is. This is men being too intimate. Under the eyes of Set. The Grand Egyptian Museum shifted moods with the light. Late afternoon made everything softer. Shadows stretching long across marble. Dust motes drifting like old memories. The chatter of tourists growing thinner, less urgent. Bennett knew the museum in every light, but he preferred this one. The hour where people trickled toward the exit, where the noise became a hum, where history seemed willing to speak a little more clearly. He walked with the surety of a man who had spent half his life in spaces like this. Steady pace, eyes scanning without hurry. Tablet held lightly in one hand, as if he could navigate the entire exhibit blind. Behind him, Youssef matched his rhythm almost perfectly. Almost. There was something about the younger man's silence. That wasn't the usual academic focus. It was tighter. Like every step required approval from some invisible authority. Bennett glanced sideways, pretending to check a display reflection. Youssef's jaw was set too firmly. His grip on the gloves too rigid. "Long day?" Bennett asked, tone even polite. Youssef blinked a second too late. Not really, just a lot of pieces to prepare. His voice was steady, but his shoulders were not. Bennett didn't press. He didn't need to. Bennett kept walking, letting the softening light guide them forward. They had work to finish, labels to check, lighting notes to finalize, but the air already felt different around Youssef. Something unspoken had started shifting. Bennett didn't know what it was yet, but he knew the exact moment a museum changed moods, and he knew the exact moment a person did too. This was one of those moments. They weren't adjusting the exhibit itself. Everything in this hall had been installed for weeks. This was documentation review. The quiet, meticulous work before the online exhibition went live next month. Bennett scrolled through the museum's internal gallery on his tablet. Each artifact photographed in crisp resolution for the digital archive. Mask 23, he said, tapping the screen. Shadow on the left side's too heavy. Visitors will think the gold is darker. Youssef stepped closer, studying the image without touching the artifact. "I'll note it," he murmured. "We can request a reshoot." Bennett nodded, already moving to the next file. He didn't expect Youssef to stop, but he did. "Color on this one is accurate," Bennett said, keeping his tone neutral. "No need for retouching." Youssef didn't respond. He was staring at the image on the tablet, not the mask in front of them. Something in his expression tightened. Bennett angled the screen slightly toward him. "You cataloged this one, right?" "Yes." A short answer. Youssef's grip on his folder deepened by a fraction. "It photographs differently," he said quietly. Bennett studied the image again. He saw what Youssef meant. The camera's lighting flattened the wood, made the face seem almost open. "Does that bother you?" Bennett asked. Youssef inhaled, held it, let it out slowly. "It feels exposed," he said finally. Bennett didn't push. He didn't need to. He turned back to the tablet, speaking lightly. "I'll mark it. Image acceptable, but review for emotional tone." A small smile. "The digital team will hate that note." Bennett swiped to the next image. Set's mask. He felt, rather than saw, Youssef go still beside him. Bennett locked the tablet and looked over gently. "We'll review the Set chamber next," he said. Youssef nodded once. But his posture wasn't the posture of someone preparing to check lighting or website thumbnails. It was someone bracing for something he didn't want to feel and couldn't outrun. The obsidian mask dominated the space. all sharp lines and shadow. Its carved snarl catching the low, dramatic light. Bennett walked in first, thumb unlocking his tablet with its familiar click. He looked at the display image, then at the real artifact. These shadows are too aggressive in the photo. He stepped closer, swiping through the image of Set. Behind him, Yusef stopped in the doorway. Bennett glanced over his shoulder. "You coming?" Yusef swallowed once and forced his legs forward. He moved with the precision he was known for, but Bennett saw the stiffness in his shoulders. The way he kept his eyes on the tablet instead of the mask. "Let's review the photographer's batch," Bennett said, tilting the screen between them. A high-resolution photo of the Set mask glowed on the display. Stripped of scale, cropped tightly. Losing none of its intensity, Yusef flinched, barely. Just enough that Bennett noticed. Bennett softened his tone, switching deliberately from senior curator to colleague. "By the way, your thesis draft came through this morning," he said. Yusef blinked, caught off guard. "I read your section on Set," Bennett continued. "It's strong, very strong, actually." Yusef's breath hitched, a tiny break in his normally steady rhythm. I wasn't expecting feedback yet," he managed. "It deserved attention," Bennett said simply. "You understand Set better than most." Something in Yusef pulled tight. Bennett tilted the tablet again. "We'll ask for a reshoot," he said softly. "No rush." Yusef breathed out slowly. But he still hadn't looked directly at the mask. Not once. Bennett followed his gaze and realized this was the first time today that Yusef wasn't looking at the artifacts with a professional's detachment. He was avoiding one. Bennett saw it. The quiet in the chamber shifted, not the museum's quiet. This was Yusef's quiet, the kind that tightened the air around him. He stood near the railing, hands steady in appearance but too carefully placed. A man holding himself together by remembering how to stand. Bennett didn't speak at first. He just closed the tablet and held it loosely against his side. "You don't have to rush this," he said, voice low. Yusef didn't answer. He tried to breathe evenly, the controlled inhale, the structured exhale, but even that rhythm faltered. His eyes stayed fixed on the floor, refusing the mask behind the glass. Bennett stepped beside him, not closer than necessary. "You studied Set for years," he said gently. "You know every form he took." Yusef blinked hard once, twice, as if the words struck somewhere deeper than the topic. "I did," he murmured, "academically." That last word was too sharp. Bennett heard the crack. "Academically," he repeated softly, as if research is never personal. Yusef stiffened. Bennett continued, not pushing but uncovering. "When I wrote my thesis," he said, "it was supposed to be on hieroglyphic semiotics." Yusef looked up, surprised, as if Bennett having a past was shocking enough, let alone a vulnerable one. "But that's not what it became," Bennett said with a quiet breath. "It shifted. It became a study of how queer identity was encoded." He said the word queer with no hesitation, no shame. Yusef went still, completely still, as if the entire room stopped breathing with him. Bennett kept his tone even. "I didn't plan to write it that way," he added. "But sometimes the truth finds its way into the work." Yusef's throat moved in a tight swallow. He looked not at Bennett, but at the reflection of Set's mask in the glass railing. "You think that's what I've been doing?" he whispered. Bennett didn't answer right away. He turned his head, studying Yusef's expression. The tension, the fear, the exhaustion of carrying something unnamed. Then, with a softness almost uncharacteristic of him, he said, "I think your writing knows you." Yusef exhaled, not a breath, but a collapse so small only someone watching him closely could see. His fingers trembled where they held the railing. The younger man closed his eyes, just once, just long enough for the first crack to appear. They stayed where they were, in front of the carved relief of Set, but something in Yusef had shifted. Not because Bennett had said anything, he hadn't. It was the opposite. Bennett said nothing at all. "This is harder than I thought." Bennett didn't move closer. "I spent years studying him," Yusef murmured. "Years writing like I understood something about being out of place." His throat tightened on the last words, and I thought, I thought if I just kept it academic, it wouldn't mean anything. He let a small, broken laugh slip out. Yusuf kept going, because he couldn't hold it anymore. My family, they raised me to be dependable. Nothing unusual. The word unusual cracked in the middle. Bennett still didn't speak. Yusuf forced in a breath, held it. Let it out slowly. I know you know, he whispered. He lowered his head. I can't fall apart here. A tight swallow. Not in front of him. He meant Set. The god he'd written about, the shadow he'd lived under. The symbol he wasn't ready to face. Bennett responded quietly. Let's go back to office. We can talk there. Yusuf nodded once, small, almost ashamed, but relieved. Yusuf kept his eyes on the floor tiles, matching his steps to the geometry. One square, then the next. A rhythm he could control, when nothing else felt controllable. Halfway down the corridor, Yusuf finally exhaled. It wasn't relief, it was the sound of someone who'd held tension too long and was just now realizing he couldn't carry it back into the world unchanged. I wasn't supposed to... He stopped, shook his head. No, I don't know what I'm saying. Bennett answered gently, then you don't have to say anything yet. Yusuf's jaw tightened, grateful for that mercy, hating that he needed it. They passed a glass wall overlooking the museum courtyard. Warm desert light spilled across the marble floor. Yusuf slowed at the window, his reflection blurred, unsteady. I wasn't hiding from you, he said quietly. It just wasn't something I thought I'd ever need to say. Bennett nodded, expression steady. You don't owe me anything. Bennett kept his voice low. The office is just down here, he said. We can sit. Close the door. Look at the photos. Or not look at them. Whatever you need. Yusuf nodded once, like someone accepting water after walking too long in heat. When they reached the side door marked staff access, Yusuf hesitated, not at the door, but at the idea of being alone with the truth, still clawing its way up his chest. He breathed in through his nose. I'm sorry, he murmured. Bennett answered without pause. There's nothing to be sorry for. Bennett pushed the door open. Inside waited quiet and privacy, and the part of the story where Yusuf's mask would finally crack. The office wasn't large, but compared to the gallery, it felt like another world. Private in a way Yusuf had almost never allowed himself to be. Bennett set the tablet down on the desk. Yusuf sank onto the nearest chair, hands clasped between his knees, elbows braced as if keeping himself upright. Bennett stayed standing for a few seconds, giving him space, before taking the chair across from him. Close enough to share quiet, far enough not to overwhelm. Neither spoke. The silence wasn't awkward. It was permission. Finally, Yusuf tried. His voice caught. I don't know why this is happening right now. Bennett nodded once, gently. Yusuf stopped, pressed his lips together, tried again. I thought I was fine. That I'd be fine. He shook his head, letting out a bitter half-laugh. I've walked past that set relief 100 times. I've lectured on him, written papers, corrected people with confidence I didn't even feel. But today I looked at him and it felt like he was looking back. He rubbed his hands slowly, thumb tracing circles over his knuckles. A grounding gesture. That didn't quite succeed. Bennett's expression softened, but he didn't speak. Yusuf wasn't done. My family raised me to be dependable, steady, a man who doesn't break, doesn't question, doesn't deviate. His breath went shallow. I tried to be that. He blinked, just once, and a single tear formed, held. Refused to fall. It slipped down before he could stop it. He wiped it away immediately, rough, embarrassed, eyes darting away from Bennett. Sorry, he muttered. For what? Bennett asked softly. Yusuf shook his head. I shouldn't. I don't want to make this your problem. It's not a problem, Bennett said. And you're allowed to feel it. That landed deeper than anything else. Yusuf pressed his palms together, trying to steady the trembling. I don't know how to say it. I don't even know where to start. Bennett replied quietly. You're already saying something. You came in here. You sat down. You're letting yourself be seen. Yusuf's eyes lowered, not in shame, but in the fragile realization that he trusted this man enough to unravel even a little. I just... His voice softened to a thin whisper. I don't want to be alone with this. Bennett nodded. You're not. Those two words, steady, unrushed, were more stabilizing than any touch could have been. And, for the first time, Yusuf let himself breathe, without bracing for collapse. Bennett waited until Yusuf's breathing steadied, for the silence to feel like something he could stay inside, without breaking. Then he spoke. Can I tell you something? Yusuf nodded. Bennett looked down for a moment, almost as if searching for the right memory to offer, then lifted his eyes again. When I told my sister, he began, she thought I was joking. Yusuf blinked. Bennett smiled softly. She laughed first, then said okay, and we were making tea in my flat. Yusuf listened with a strange focus, like the simplicity itself felt foreign. I told my closest friend the week after, Bennett continued. He shrugged, hugged me, and asked if we were still meeting for football the next morning. A small breath escaped Yusuf, half disbelief, half longing. He let that sink in before adding, softer. But that was my way. Just mine. Yusuf's gaze lowered. He studied the floor, the grain of the wood, anything that wasn't the weight in his chest. Bennett didn't fill the silence. He let Yusuf sit inside it. Then, with a tone barely above a whisper, gentle but steady, he spoke again. Not everyone has my path. Not everyone has my timing. Some people open quietly, some slowly, some not at all. Yusuf's throat tightened, his fingers laced together. And there's nothing wrong with any of that, Bennett said. His next words were even softer. There isn't a right way to be who you are. There isn't a wrong way to be afraid. Yusuf inhaled sharply. A breath he hadn't meant to take. One that felt like it had been trapped for years. Bennett continued. You're not failing, he murmured. You're not late. You're not broken. Yusuf closed his eyes. Just for a moment, not to hide, but because the truth in those words hit deeper than anything dramatic would have. He swallowed. I wish it were that simple. For most people, it isn't. He leaned back slightly, hands still resting loosely on his thighs. But simple or not, you don't have to go through the first step alone. Yusuf looked up, not fully, not bravely. Just enough to meet Bennett's gaze for one flickering second, and in that second, his chest eased for the first time that day. Not because the fear disappeared, but because someone saw it. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls closed in, but because the truth finally had nowhere else to go. Yusuf leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it could offer instructions on how to breathe. I've never said any of this, he murmured. Not to anyone, not even to myself. Yusuf swallowed hard. I kept thinking I'd outgrow it. His voice was thin, strained, or pray it away, or bury it under work. He laughed once, a small broken sound. But it didn't go anywhere. His breathing shook, and that terrifies me. Bennett's voice was gentle but certain. Being who you are shouldn't terrify you. Yusuf's jaw tightened. I don't want to disappoint anyone. I don't want to disappoint God. Bennett exhaled slowly, not in frustration. In empathy. You're not disappointing anyone, he said softly. Not him, not the world, not me. The last one made Yusuf's breath break entirely. Just a tremor, but enough. Enough to show he had reached the edge of what he could carry alone. He pressed a hand to his face, wiped under his eye quickly, as if stopping a tear before it could embarrass him. I'm sorry, he whispered. Don't be. I don't want to be alone with this anymore. Bennett's chair scraped softly as he stood. He approached slowly, giving Yusuf every chance to pull back. Yusuf didn't move, didn't look up, didn't speak. He just stayed there, shoulders trembling, hands clenched, breath uneven. Bennett knelt beside him. He placed one hand gently on Yusuf's upper arm. The touch landed like relief. Yusuf exhaled, a shaking, collapsing breath, and Bennett drew him into a hug for Yusuf to lean into. Yusuf's hands hovered for a second, as if unsure whether he was allowed. Then finally, slowly, he gripped the back of Bennett's shirt, holding on like a man who'd been drifting for years, and had finally found something solid. His forehead pressed to Bennett's shoulder. A single tear landed on the fabric. "You're not alone," Bennett murmured. "You're not wrong, and you're not broken." Yusuf didn't say anything back. He didn't have to. He just let himself be held, for the first time. The hug ended slowly. For a few minutes, neither spoke. The office hum of the air vent, the soft glow of the desk lamp, the muffled quiet of evening settling over the museum, it all created a small pocket of calm that Yusuf desperately needed. He rubbed his thumb along the ridge of his finger again, not trembling now, just grounding himself. "My face must look terrible," he murmured eventually. "Not at all," Bennett said. "You look like someone who finally let himself breathe." Yusuf huffed a soft, self-conscious laugh. He wiped under his eye again, more out of habit than necessity. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "You don't need to apologize," Bennett replied. Yusuf nodded, eyes fixed on the grain of the desk. His voice came quieter. "I didn't think I'd ever say anything like that. Not to anyone. Not like this." "And you didn't plan to," Bennett said. It wasn't forced. That seemed to steady Yusuf more than anything else had. He leaned back, hands resting loosely on his thighs now, breathing with more ease. After a while, he asked softly, "Can we stay a few more minutes? I don't think I can face the world yet." Bennett nodded without hesitation. "Of course." Yusuf closed his eyes briefly, not overwhelmed this time, but grateful. They stayed like that, two men in a small office. Lamplight warming the air, breathing in the soft aftermath of breaking and being held. When Yusuf finally opened his eyes again, they were clearer. He sat up a little, shoulders steadier, voice firmer. "Okay," he said softly. "I'm all right." When they finally stepped outside, the night was warm but not heavy. The museum lights glowed gold against the stone, casting long shadows that moved gently with the heat. Yusuf paused just beyond the doorway, hands in his pockets. Bennett stood beside him, not close enough to crowd, close enough to feel like a presence, not a responsibility. After a minute, a soft scuffing sound came from the stairs. A desert dog. Sandy fur, lean legs, ears pointed up like small flags catching the night, trotted toward them. Yusuf noticed first. The dog slowed, stopped in front of them, tilted its head. Right between them, like joining the silence, like listening. Yusuf let out the smallest breath of surprised amusement. Barely a sound, but real. The dog looked up at him. They stayed like that for a while, the three of them in a small circle of warm light, breathing the same quiet air. Eventually the dog stood, took one slow step toward Yusuf, brushed its side lightly against his leg, a silent reassurance, and then wandered off into the night. Yusuf watched it go. Bennett waited a beat before speaking, voice gentle and low. "It's late," he said. "I was going to get something warm to eat before heading home. You don't have to join me. But you're welcome to." Yusuf looked at him, still a bit red around the eyes, still fragile, but calmer, and no longer hiding. He swallowed once, then nodded. "I'd like that," he said quietly. Bennett nodded back, not smiling, not making more of it than it was. "Good," he answered. They started walking, side by side. Some truths don't explode into the world. Some begin in a quiet room with one sentence said too softly, and one person steady enough to hear it. Bennett didn't push. He simply stayed. The calm presence of someone who already walked this road and knows what fear feels like, and Yusuf didn't transform. He just let himself breathe, let himself be honest. Coming out doesn't have to be loud. Sometimes it's a whisper shared with the right person, a moment gentle enough to hold your shaking. The ENTJ and the ISTJ, one certain, one careful. Finding a small place in the world where honesty doesn't hurt. This was men being too intimate. A quiet courage, a steady presence, a reminder that your first step out of the dark never has to be taken alone. If this stayed with you, listen to more from Gay audiobooks, where tension meets temptation, and quiet becomes everything. Also my short novel, Men Being Too Intimate series. When the car door closed, The Sunrise didn't ask for more, A Table for One, and more are now available on Kindle Unlimited. You'll find the link in the description. Hope you check it out and enjoy.